Hello everyone, welcome to today's KeyShot 3 webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So what we're going to be talking about is basically everything we're doing in KeyShot 3 that's, of course, trying to make your lives easier. So we'll cover, of course, the UI update, and we'll go into the added functionality to the way you work with models and parts, and of course we'll talk about animation. So let's just see here. See if I can get out of my browser. All right, there we go. So KeyShot 3, here we are. This is definitely an evolution of KeyShot, so you'll still feel very comfortable and familiar being a current KeyShot user. But also we're trying to make it easier for new users to approach and reduce that learning curve a little bit more. One thing, let me get this looking like how it will look when you first start KeyShot. You have your toolbar here. So this toolbar, just like KeyShot and Hypershot before that, you're really led through the workflow. You start with import, go into the library, then you can go and tune some settings, and now of course you have your timeline, which is where we'll mostly deal with animation. So I'm going to go ahead and import a file. And in this case, I am actually importing a KeyShot BIP file. And this is one of the areas of KeyShot that has been the most confusing for our users, and it's led to some of the most consistent support issues on our end. And it's the idea of, are you opening a BIP file or are you importing a BIP file? And so what we've done is just anytime you're bringing in a BIP file and you actually use the import option, you're given the option to actually open, which will bring in that BIP file as a project rather than importing the data from that BIP file into a new project, which is what the import function does. So let's see here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and import. So when I import a BIP, I'm taking the data from that BIP and ignoring things like the environment, and I'm bringing that straight into this BIP. So all the settings from this scene are going to be applied to the data from my previous BIP file. So let's go ahead and bring that in. All right, so there's our basic ring file. So that's, of course, the first step, the import. And then you have the library. So this is where you deal with your assets. And, of course, there's the materials, environments, backplates, textures, and previous renderings. So looking at the materials library, this definitely looks a bit different than KeyShot 2, and the main difference is the way you deal with groups and the way you organize your actual files. You'll see we have a collapsible materials folder. This materials folder is linking up to a folder on your system. In my case here, we have the KeyShot 3 resources folder, shortcut to my documents KeyShot 3. And this is sourcing directly from this materials folder right here. And you can see here, I have these folders, and these are exactly the folders I see in the software. And the nice thing about this is I can go in here, can actually make a folder, call it the test folder, and refresh my system here, and it adds that folder. And of course we can go the other way. And okay, it's actually, we added it into the glass. But you can see we have the folder there. So add it to this level here instead. Call that test 3, and there's the folder there. And you can see it's creating those folders on the desktop as well. So what this allows you to do is actually organize files in a much more logical operating system type of way. I can go in here to the wood, and actually let's go into plastic, into the folder itself. I could take all of these subfolders and actually drag and drop them on my system into a new folder, or move them from one system to another and make a folder, with a specific project name. But then, of course, I can also organize right here in KeyShot as well. I can make a multi-selection of these material files, and I can drag and drop them right into my test folder here. And now they're in there. And we can just put those back in here. And you can then go into lower level folders And as you drag the file, it does show you what's currently in that folder. So you can really organize very well here. So we'll just leave that there. And so you can see it's a different system than what's in KeyShot 2, which is you deal with a single MTL material file for an entire group of materials. And with this system, you're actually dealing with single material files that populate an entire folder, which is what forms the groups. So if we take a look at one of these folders here, if we go into plastic and we look at basic, you can see, looking at here, we have basic, one single material, black shiny plastic, and that's one single material file. And what that allows me to do is take that one single file, throw it onto a new system, and then I have that single file. And I can take, of course, many more. Let's find some more here. Like if we look at the mesh, go into the mesh folder here, I can take all these individual material files and put them onto a new system or move them into a server location and grab those for new users from those new locations. Now the other thing, of course, with a material file, you can see these are very small files, and these mesh files have textures on them. And there's lots of different textured materials, especially if we look at the metals folder here. Something like this brushed aluminum, let's just drag and drop that right on there. You can see there is a texture, and any textured material is, of course, sourcing a texture from not within the material file itself, but from the textures folder on the system. So if we look at my aluminum folder here, where this is sourcing from, we have a brushed material file. This definitely doesn't have an image file embedded in it. This is only 34 kilobytes. So this is looking at, back in the KeyShot 3 textures folder, this is actually looking at my brushed texture here. So of course I could manually go into my materials folder and grab the aluminum material file, and then manually go into my textures folder, grab the texture, and move those things to a new system. But what I can actually do is I can take any number of these materials, I can do a multi-selection, or I can just select one, and I can do an export right here. And I'm just going to put this on the desktop, and we'll call that test. And you can see this is the KeyShot material package. Save that. And now this file, you can see, is much larger, but it's also compressed, so it doesn't get too large with the texture. But it's basically the material file and the texture compressed into a package file. And then you can go in, if I go to a different folder here, I can do an import. So I can go to a new system at this point, go to import, select that test.keyshot material package, click open. And the nice thing here is it subscribes to the standards that you're used to when you're trying to overwrite files on your operating system. It warns you when there's a conflict. So I have this old brush texture and this new brush texture coming from the material package, and I know I can I can skip or overwrite. It doesn't really matter. So I'll just overwrite, and now that file will be in here. So that's basically the major update to the material system, is that it's more like a standard file browser, that you're the same kind of way you work with just standard files on your operating system. That's how you'll work with material files. And then, of course, that also is the same with environments. You can create subcategories here. So if I wanted to organize my studios into a studio folder, I can just grab all these different studio environments and move them up into my studio folder here. And now I can look at just studios. And I can go in and do, outdoors, make a new folder, go into here and grab these outdoor scenes and put those right into there. And now I can really organize these things very easily. Backplates, of course, the same system. So you can really organize your materials and environments and other assets much more easily. So that is the basics of the library. There's some neat little tricks. Of course, there's lots of drag and drop abilities here, so I can put in a backplate very easily. And this is also not a webinar that's going to cover, all of the basics of KeyShot. A lot of the things like dragging and dropping materials, I'm just glancing over, assuming most of you are current users and interested in what's coming next. But of course, if you're a new user and you're watching and a little bit confused on the basics of how KeyShot works, we did, I think the last webinar was a KeyShot Basics webinar, and that'll definitely get you up to speed on how it works. And those can be found on our website. So another nice little trick with drag and drop beyond the standard, environments and backplate drag and dropping is, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my backplate also here, is actually the textures. So let me just see. You can see here we can drag and drop these textures right onto the surfaces here. Now there's a nice little feature here that we haven't actually hooked up for you quite yet in what's basically the beta build here. And that's an actual little prompt that will ask you what kind of texture you want to drag that on as. And I do have that actually hooked up in another way, which is a nice little new trick. And this is actually new to KeyShot 3. If I go to just a Windows folder here, of course this works on the Mac as well, I can go to my textures folder, or really, any other image, and I can drag and drop it right on from the operating system window onto my surface. And when I do that, I get right now a very basic prompt. This will look prettier in the final version, but I can just select that to be used as a bump map, or I can go in, and I can say, this one to be used as a color map. So it's a nice little trick there for just being able to drag and drop. This is also, you're able to drag and drop environments directly in, so I can grab these environments, drop them right into this empty space, and it'll use that environment rather than having to go through the library at all times, or having to go through the options menu or the project window as we call it now. So I'm just going to put a more basic material on here. In fact, let's go into the metals, precious, and we'll do platinum. And of course the hotkeys from the past are still in here, so I can shift, left click, shift, right click, and that'll paste that material right on there. Alright, so let's move past the library and get into the next thing here. We have the project. Alright, so before I finish talking about all the different updates to the user interface that you'll see in each one of these tabs, let's talk a little bit about working with models, working with parts, and working with materials. So the first thing I want to do before I get into moving individual parts and that kind of new stuff, I want to just edit my material. Now, of course, I can go into my library and drag and drop a diamond material onto my diamonds here. But I can also edit materials. And one of the things we're trying to make easier in KeyShot is editing materials, because we always get the request for more and more materials, but it's basically impossible for us to provide a material library that's going to have every material you need for every project. So we're trying to encourage customization and making it easier, and recognizing that KeyShot 2 in some ways makes it a little bit hard to start customizing your materials. So we're trying to improve that. So of course I can double click on my surface here, but I can also go into my scene tree, which is the first tab of the project menu, and I can make a selection and edit the material of that selection. So for example, if I select this diamond up here, and of course it selects the other way, if I click in here, it'll select. So I'm going to select this diamond, and if I right click on it, I can edit material, or I can right click in here, edit material. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do that, edit material. Now that brings you into the material tab, and you can see one of the big differences here is you have an actual internal library, and these are all the materials that have been used in the current scene. Now you will see that this isn't totally ready to show quite yet. It's not in its final release form. So I'm going to basically just put that down there. So on this material, I can go to a new type of material type, and in this case I'm going to do a gem. Okay, you can see that changes all my surfaces that are using that material, and now I can just work with my sliders. So, and of course the way KeyShot works is different materials have different settings. There's some very basic ones like diffuse that just has a color and nothing much more than that. And then you have other simple ones like metal, very easy color and roughness. And so we give you these individual material types so that you can get close to what you want just by selecting the type of material. If you need metallic paint, you can get a good starting point just by going to that material type. Now there are the more advanced ones, of course, like gem. And the gem material has a few more options because it can do some really interesting things. So I'm going to take my roughness down on my gem because you can see it gives that sort of frosted look when it's rough. And I'm going to bring my index of refraction up. Now, I'm basically trying to replicate diamonds here, so I'm going to put my index of refraction pretty high, around there. Now, the transparency is basically a control of color density, and also some of the names I'm using here are probably going to be refined a bit and made to be a little more user-friendly and intuitive in the final version. So you may see some changes, but basically, if you notice, as I increase the transparency, what I'm really doing is decreasing the density of the color in my diamonds. And you can really notice that comparing this really large diamond to these smaller ones, I get a lot more color because it's a bigger area of color. So the density, is more noticeable. As I bring my transparency down, I get color in my smaller diamonds as well. But diamonds, we're just going to do white. So there we go. Now another really cool thing about the gem material is the Abbey number. This is your dispersion. If I bring that up a little bit, start to see that prismatic effect, and this will help simulate that whole fire in the diamond thing. So for something like this, depending on how exaggerated I want the effect, I might put it around here. Let that res up. There we go. And I can try some different environments here to make this look nice. Maybe a softer jewelry type environment. There we go. Now there's hotkeys for different things, of course. We have, do you want to see the backplate? Remember that backplate we loaded earlier? I can load that right in. I still have that basically saved by pressing the hotkey B. I can get back to that. Or I can see the environment as my background. Or I can see a solid color as my background. So we have hotkeys for all these things. And we're working on updating the hotkey list so that when you press K, you'll see all these different new hotkeys in here. And this will be, of course, your cheat sheet of hotkeys. All right, so this is a nice looking render. So I'm going to leave my background white, my environment, that nice soft jewelry environment. And let's look at the last couple options here. So we have, of course, our color, our roughness, and then you have your dispersion. And by increasing the dispersion samples, we can get basically higher quality, but we don't really need to increase that almost ever because it's not really noticeable. All right, so there is basically our materials. And of course, these can always be saved back into the material library. So now let's take a look at another type of material, this metal. I'm going to double click, opens that up. And one of the coolest new things is being able to map the opacity or transparency of a surface without having to use the old-fashioned general material. And this also ties into an entire update to the way you work with textures. So if we look at the Textures tab here, you can see we have each of the different textures that are available for a given material shown right here. So you can see some materials have more textures than others. The plastic, for example, has all 4 texture types: specular, opacity, bump, color. So let's take a look, though, at a metal texture or a metal material with texture. So without, bump and color, they've always been around in KeyShot, so I won't cover those too much, but opacity is brand new. And let's go ahead and open that up, and I can go into my textures folder here. Now I have a couple of options. I can use any image to act as a transparency image, and what's going to happen is I'll basically set it to use either black or white values as more or less transparent. So if I bring in mesh circular alpha, by default I don't actually see any result because KeyShot doesn't know that this isn't a TIFF with transparency or a PNG with transparency, and that's what's assuming is the default. So what I need to do is look at my opacity mode and change this to color. And right now, when it's set to color, it says black is transparent. I can set it to inverse color. And now it's saying white is transparent. So let's leave it on color. And now I want to change the mapping. So I'm going to set this to box map. And you can see we have those nice holes cut in it. Now I can do a bit of mapping adjustments in the old-fashioned way with just some scale sliders